Meanwhile, in the United States, we are very afraid of terrorism, despite the fact that we haven't had a major assault on American soil, a major assault on American interests, even outside of war zones, since 2001. John Mueller, Woody Hayes Professor of National Security Studies at Ohio State University, has written Overblown, How Politicians and the Terrorism Industry Inflate National Security Threats and Why We Believe Them. All right, before we go back to our callers and back to the subject at hand, what's the story on the Woody Hayes Chair of National Security Studies?
Well, as you're well aware, universities are always looking for gimmicks for people to give them money, so they decided to endow a chair in the name of Woody Hayes and get some of the football players to cough up some money, and they managed to do it quite successfully, so they score one on that. And
I thought it would be the chair of Woody Hayes Chair of Ground Game Studies, or not defense studies.
Yeah, or a cloud of dust and all that. Well, what happened was that they didn't actually need a chair in football, actually, at Ohio State. And Woody Hayes had a very strong interest in military history and defense issues. So they basically put the chair in the area that he also was interested in. He had a ton of books about military history, and he's really quite serious and sophisticated student of the subject. And he had almost no books about football around. Someone asked him that, and he said, well, I already know about football. So they sort of went to his second interest, but in many respects, even his first interest.
Fascinating. 1-800-955-1776. And no, don't call about Ohio State football. No, I'm sure John Mueller would be willing to talk about that, too.
Well, unless you're from Florida.
Unless you're from Florida, right. How many people die in this country every year in bathtub accidents?
Somewhere between 300 and 400 die drowning in bathtubs.
And how many Americans, civilians, do we lose to terrorism?
Well, zero outside of 9/11. The number of Americans who have died in the United States from terrorism, outside obviously of 2001, is smaller than the number of Americans who have died drowning in toilets, much less by bathtubs. Your chance, if you live outside a war zone anywhere in the world, your chance of being killed by an international terrorist at present rate is about 1 in 80,000 over an 80-year lifespan, which is about the same as being killed by an asteroid. And that assumes, by the way, that there's another 9/11 somewhere in the world every several years. If that isn't the case, then your chance of being killed by terrorists falls to about 1 in 130,000. And it seems to me we should keep that in mind. It doesn't mean terrorism isn't a problem. It doesn't mean people don't get killed. It doesn't mean that those guys aren't out there. But it does mean that, going back somewhat to what you were saying a little bit earlier about Israel, that it's not the end of the world and something we can handle and deal with and bring under a fair amount of control. Nevertheless, you have huge numbers of people who are very concerned about that they themselves might be hurt, and almost nobody bringing out what these probabilities are.
1-800-955-1776. Let's go to David, St. Paul, Minnesota. You're on the Michael Medved Show with Professor Mueller.
Hi, Michael. I'm just calling to thank your guest. I've been thinking this for years. It's been making me nuts to see all the spending on this, and life's dangerous, and this is just one more little addition. And so it's as if, all of those legislators who want my kids to wear a helmet when they ride in a shopping cart are after me to do all, to take money and divert it from all the useful things that we could do in terms of building better cars and windmills and making movies and doing the things that we ought to do instead of this.
Making movies? I'm not sure, but go ahead, Professor Mueller.
Yes, well, some movies are okay. Particularly musicals, I used to write about them. Yes, it's not only that, but it's also the costs both economically and in terms of human life. Every half hour people are forced to wait at an airport costs the economy somewhere between $8 and $15 billion a year. It also reduces the number of people who take short-haul flights. Instead, they'll take automobiles, and those are far more dangerous than airplanes.
Yeah, you make that point very persuasively in your book. I take it that what I went through, I just flew into North Dakota, arrived this morning, taking a night flight. And as usual, we have to now limit the amount of liquids and gels that you take with you and put it in a clear plastic bag. Do you think this has saved a lot of American lives?
I think very few. What you have to do basically is, as a caller said, you live with a certain amount of risk. Obviously, if you want to prevent every single death, what you do is ground all the airlines. or maybe do strip searches or something. And clearly, you have to draw the line somewhere. And some of this hysteria about the explosives and so forth may be a place to really investigate.
Well, you make the case in your book, and I didn't know this, that at least according to some experts, this plot to blow up the 10 planes by assembling bombs on board the planes using these little liquids, this London plot was nowhere near being able to be actualized.
Yes, some of the so-called plotters, or probably real plotters, didn't even have passports. So they're not exactly likely to board that many international flights without a passport. The guys, were plotting, and it's probably a really good thing that if the allegations are correct, that we have these guys under control, that's for sure. But the likelihood that they'd be able to pull that attack off, a lot of chemists say, is very low. They're trying to deal with very dangerous chemicals. The most likely thing is that they blow themselves up in the process of trying to put them together before it even got to the airport. So it would take a lot of coordination. The plot was obviously a diabolical and horrible one, but the likelihood that they would have pulled it off successfully is by no means high. And they're dealing with really dangerous substances which are very hard to control. Very few people have ever used chemical weapons. Shinriko tried them over, let's say, 12 years ago now, setting off sarin in a enclosed space, and only about 12 people died. They're not massively destructive necessarily.
Randy, San Antonio, you're on the Michael Medved Show with John Mueller. Randy? San Antonio? Nope.
Yes.
Randy, you're on the air.
How do you respond, Professor Mueller, to the assertion that the reason there have not been any attacks in the United States is not so much because we're doing such a great job, but because we have a very patient enemy who knows that we respond swift, as shown after 9/11, but then steam due to political correctness and whatever, and if they kept on doing periodic smaller attacks...
All right, quickly, Professor Mueller, what about that? Are we just safe because Al-Qaeda's decided not to hit us?
Well, they may have decided not to hit us, but I don't think it's because they're being patient for a big attack. Clearly, the attack on 9/11 only took about 2 years to plan. They certainly had plenty of provocation, such as the war in Iraq. So it's not clear that, and they keep saying they're going to attack. And so the fact that they don't do it strikes me as it more has to do with their weakness or incapacity than
just
the
think
fact
of
that
it, murderous crazies losing credibility. Part of the theme of Overblown by John Mueller. Your call's coming up. So every once in a while, you pick up a book and you may disagree with it profoundly, and I disagree with most of Overblown, and yet the book itself and the author, John Mueller, are so provocative that I think it merits conversation, particularly from conservatives in particular, who may support the ongoing war against Islamo-Nazi terror. 1-800-955-1776. Professor Mueller, let's go directly to our calls. I do want to ask you later on what precisely you would have advised President Bush to do after 9/11, because you do believe that President Bush did almost all the wrong things. Let's go to Kim in Louisville, Kentucky. You're on the Michael Medved Show.
Yes, sir. Thank you for taking my call. I would just like to ask your guest if he feels it would be true to say the reason we have not been attacked since 9/11 was because this administration saw the true threat and went on the offense and have stayed on top of it.
Well, I do think security has gotten better since 9/11, and I do think that particularly the war in Afghanistan severely disrupted Al-Qaeda. And I do think also that policing, particularly overseas, has really been fairly effective in quite a few areas, such as Pakistan and Indonesia and Saudi Arabia and other places.
France even has done a pretty good job, haven't they?
And well, in France, seems to they've got a lot of disaffected Muslims there, but zero terrorism. They had riots, but not terrorism. The riots were because people wanted to join, get jobs, and join the French society. But in order to do terrorism, you don't need 40,000 people. All you need is 5, 7, 12, 3 people in the country. And the idea that they've been kept out, the government is not exactly what you'd call perfect, as it was demonstrated after the Hurricane Katrina. Every year in this country, 300 million foreigners enter this country legally every year. That's as many as people as there are in the United States. The idea that the terrorists couldn't infiltrate 2, 3, 7 people among those now nearly 2 billion people that have come in the country legally strikes me as being suggesting not that the security is perfect, but rather that they're not trying very hard or not very capable. In addition, of course, there are thousands who come across the border illegally every day. So while I do give Bush credit for, and the administration for reducing, for shoring up some of this, I don't think anybody would accuse this administration of being perfect. And what you're dealing with is just a tiny number of people that are necessary. So anyway, what it come down, basically, it seems to me that more likely is just that they're not trying very hard, or they're not nearly as diabolical, devoted, and dedicated as we often give them the credit for.
Kim, thanks for your call. The point that you make, the number you just gave, about 300 million people entering this country legally.
Foreigners. These are foreigners, by the way, not Americans. Foreigners.
Yeah, 300 people entering the United States, coming into this country. One of the things that is stunning is that of the illegals who are here and are here long term, close to half, according to every study, are people who entered this country legally. In other words, it should be surprising. If you're talking about 300 million people coming into this country, a bunch of them don't leave when they're supposed to.
Yeah, they hang on.
Yeah,
right. So we've got a lot of people coming in, and obviously we need that. Obviously, this is part of international trade, which is important. And since if to pull off a terrorist attack took 20,000 people, obviously you could pretty much prevent that. But to just have a handful that couldn't come in. In fact, the 9/11 plotters, even before 9/11, were assuming that after the 9/11 attacks took place, they wouldn't be able to get any Arab males into the United States at all. And so they were already making plans to use non-Arabs, use Europeans, Southeast Asians, who they could use for their cause. So they were already thinking about that, but they haven't done anything. And there's been people picked up in this country, but they've been basically locals, and most of them are fairly flaky ones. And not there's never been the FBI, as of 2005, had a report which indicated the FBI has not been able to find a single true Al Qaeda cell in the United States after at that point 4 years of very intensive and very well-funded sleuthing.
Yeah, and the number of foreign students in this country. You know, Professor, how many foreign students we have in the country right now?
No, I don't know, but they'd be among those 300 million coming in. There are thousands, probably tens of thousands of them.
600,000
yeah,
enrolled in colleges and universities right now, and that's down. It used to be 750,000, but that's a lot of foreign students.
That's right, and a lot of those, it's not helping us that we're not getting those students. A lot of those students are really valuable and helpful. I just give you an example of somebody I talked to today. He's a Korean. He's ethnic Korean, but he's from Japan, and the Koreans in Japan have a kind of strange status. And even though he's been in our graduate program doing very well for 2 years, he had to wait 4 months to be able to return this time.
All right,
really
problems with the borders, problems with terrorism in general. What would the right response have been, according to John Mueller, author of Overblown, to the 9/11 attacks? We'll get that answer coming